You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Prevalence of being contrarian instead of original right now, or contrarian thoughts like being an illusion of original thought is nauseating.
It's a lot easier to take someone's thought process that has, sat down and thought of things and taken the time to assess and form an opinion about them. And then once it's out there, it's a lot easier to say, no, that sucks, and this is why, than actually take the time and form your own thoughts and opinions about things.
I kind of think of it in the same way. Like I was in London the other day, and I ended up watching like a UFC fight for the first time in like a really long time. Oh, fuck, dude. I think the last time I sat down and watched a UFC fight was like Chuck Liddell was winning something.
Oh, dude.
Like that, like what's it, 20 years ago, maybe? Like give or take. Like
the glory days. I think they threw a beer bottle in at the end.
Dude, Chuck Liddell to me was indiscernible from Austin 316. I was like, oh, it's just a career change. It's just Austin 316 can make more money. Shout out. I think Stone Cold Steve Austin actually has quite a successful podcast.
Awesome. Good for him, man.
Which is like good for him indeed. If you can have a podcast now that's not talking to porn stars, I think you're doing okay. Have you seen the prevalence of this?
You can't go on Instagram and not see this.
Dude, Instagram is so insidious. Like we had a marketing meeting earlier. We were talking about the potential utility of TikTok, and we're like, well, probably going to be going bye-bye sometime soon. And it's like, because of their whatever predatory data collection, dishonesty at a court, whatever, espionage, CCP, Xi Jinping, whatever. Like fucking everyone's in cahoots with everyone. But then you go on Instagram and you go to your Explore page, and it's like the curated algorithm for a 33-year-old man on Instagram is so insulting. It's so unbelievably insulting. Like Instagram's main competition now is OnlyFans and Pornhub. Like, is that how they're slighting you know what I mean? Like, it's insane. And so much of it is just porn stars talking to fat guys with podcasts.
Yeah. I see that clip like once a week, and I don't really understand. And you don't really even need to know that they're a porn star to know that they're a porn star. Like, what are they talking? Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
That's definitely a porn
and
star.
Also, too, like, I thought the whole point was to not hear them talk. Like, who's tuning in for the production quality, Like,
right. Yeah. If you're in the market for a good porno film, you're probably not there for the dialogue.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This isn't like Casablanca or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's not if you're even using the word film, I don't know what's worse. Actual masturbation or mental masturbation?
Oh, man. Probably the mental
well, that's Instagram for you. Well, that's kind of, I mean, to bring it full circle, for this to come
great.
full circle.
Choice of words there.
Right. You know what? Yeah. I only said that in hopes that Killian Hamilton was listening. But it's just that's what Instagram fitness has become, is just like this diatribe of mental masturbation. And like, there's no, like, if you look back at the corpus of human history and you got rid of 200 people selectively, not like Hitler, but like 200 people. And do you know how fucked we would be? Like if you got rid of like Thomas Edison, if you got rid of Tesla, if you got rid of, I don't fucking know, Henry VIII, if you got Napoleon, whatever, like, and go through across time and across geography and pick out like very influential people. Now you could think, well, someone else would be there to fill their place, but based off of like Elon Musk or Gandhi, whatever, if you just strategic, like how many people die every day?
A lot of people.
I have no idea what the answer is to that. A lot of people, more than 200.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Right? Yeah, like without a doubt. There's probably 200. Yeah. But imagine like if through time those people just didn't exist. Right? Like how few and far between like original thought is. and then the vying for attention by the proclamation of some sort of original thought by like, now I use the word gerrymander a lot. So here's an interesting thing I've noticed about myself. And I'm going to share it with whoever wants to listen. Is when I was a kid, I used to read the dictionary to understand what words meant. But now I read etymology of words to understand where words came from. Like I've noticed that like when I look up, I mean, I know the definitions of the words I use 98% of the time. 90 or 2% of the time I'm just going out in left field. I'd be like, bullshit. That'll land. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just made it up. But I find myself looking into like the etymology of words and like seeing where they came from. And I find it's like so much more impactful when you know like what the actual root of a word is. And it's like, I find myself thinking about the root of ideas and like where they come from, and not just like in your head, because that's just going to turn into a meditation podcast. And, you know, there are way better meditation podcasts out there than listening to us.
Absolutely.
But I just think about like, you know, we have a pretty good working understanding of the goings on within the fitness industry for the last 20 years, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I would say more or less 15 to 20 years. And increasingly more so as we orbit closer and closer to the center of this industry. And understanding where thoughts originate from and watching their, let's call it evolution, but then just watching people uncertain of, because it's like, I put up this thing the other day. I don't know. I think a lot or most when I'm asleep, and that's what wakes me up early, is like your brain's like, all right, like, what are we doing here? If you're going to be used, like, let's just do something. Get up, you stupid fuck. And it's like, it's all been said before, but I think now it's turning into like just who says it rather than trying to say or do, and more importantly, do anything new. Because I started to think about like you can, and I've had this happen a few times, is like you can scroll and see two people arguing either sides of the aisle of a particular point. And then I was like, well, I don't know if Instagram is the place for that, because I think with the surface level intelligence you need to operate in the fitness industry, and I don't mean that to be demeaning, because I throw me and you, in that bucket. It's like you could and should be able to argue both sides of the aisle for a particular point. I think we could do that. And I think that's what we're going to do, is be like, all right, let's think of the most absolutist contrarian claims we can think of and argue for and against them, understanding full well that we're just really making content for people, which I've let go years ago as really what I do. I tell that to people on planes. Like, what do you do? I just kind of like make content for people on the internet. But I think it's a useful into porn, right? Yeah.
For mental,
but I think it's a useful endeavor, right? Learning how to show your work, I think, is like the most important thing. Now, I didn't give a fuck about it when it was mathematics, because I don't care about the outcome of math. But when I think about fitness and things like that, I think showing how you arrived at a conclusion is like very, very useful, because it's not the conclusion that you're after. It's not the principle you used to arrive at. That's what's reusable, is the principle, right? Or the logic or the critical thinking. So, I mean, kind of off the top of our head, or off the collective heads, can you think of a point that gets argued like vehemently in the fitness industry as absolute on either side of the aisle?
I have a specific one in my head, because I don't do this to myself very much, but there's one page that I follow that I can't unfollow because of the information that they put out there.
He's real. Yeah. He's one of us. Yeah. The God King bleeds.
I try to fill my feed with people that I want to see their shit, not people that it pisses me off when I see their shit. But in terms of, any absolute statement is going to rub me the wrong way, because I do have that kind of mindset. You've been in how many calls with me over the last however many years, and we'll have a conversation going, and I'll, to myself out loud in that call, argue both sides of the point until I come to the middle and figure out what my opinion is on it. So I think this is a good conversation to have, and I enjoy this topic because that's exactly how my brain works. And like you said, I think the prevalence of these conversations it only really exists on the internet in this context, because if you and I had a differing opinion on a specific topic and we were doing a training session together, you know what this would be? It would be a conversation. And we would probably end somewhere in the middle, like, oh, yeah, you're actually right in the context that you're talking about. But in this context, I'm actually right. And understanding that happens with that deeper layer of context and that conversation around it, which doesn't happen on the internet, because I think in terms of content creation, and this is where I've come from in the past, is that if I put a post out there that seems very finite and very pointed, I'm talking to one person when I write that post. And it's happened, pretty much any time I've put a post out there. It's, whether it's something to be helpful or whether it's something like, don't do this shit. I'm talking to one person when I write a post, and it may be a theoretical person or it may be a very real person, but yeah, right. But the thing that I saw recently, and this is just like, people create content to get likes and views and whatever it might be. So it may have been just to be a statement to get people talking, which it did. But they said the number one worst exercise for an athlete is a deadlift. So what's that? Yeah, you love it? I know.
I love it.
You can argue.
Yeah, I love it.
That's a good one, because you can argue both sides of that. And I think there is validity on both sides of that. But I don't think that, well, the statement itself, I don't think it's the number one worst exercise for an athlete. I think that's false. But I could argue that it's not the best exercise for an athlete to be doing, and that athletes don't need to do it. And I could also argue that it is a great exercise for athletes to be doing. So maybe I'll start on the side of agreeing with them, so that I could end on the side that I actually feel, and it kind of resonates with me, is that I think athletes should be able to deadlift. But if we look at the deadlift, it's going to be the lift that you can move the most amount of weight. You're in positions that are relatively stable through the lower body, the pelvis. You can exert a fuck ton of force outside of anything that's externally supported. So it's going to be something where you're moving a lot of weight. Now, the consideration around that is that there's going to be, the barrier of skill is essentially going to start with being able to stabilize your spine against the load that you're moving, right? And that can be something that, if we're not doing that properly, it can put you at risk. Is that there is a real risk of injury the more weight you have in your hands as you're deadlifting. And I'm sure you have too. I've worked with plenty of people that have injured themselves deadlifting because they don't have a full understanding of the movement itself, whether that's core bracing, whether they don't have the prerequisite levels of stability to be able to do it, or there's any sort of predispositions in terms of injury or structural deficits that are going to kind of put them at risk, where maybe that shouldn't be something that they're loading. So I totally get that. And I understand that that's a valid point, that someone that needs to perform in their sport, this may be an exercise that actually puts them at risk. And in the gym, in the weight room, outside of their sport. So if they are putting themselves at risk, or I kind of another side of this is the recovery deficit is going to put them in. Is that even if you are very technically sound at deadlifting and you can do it very safely, it's going to take a toll to recover from. And that may affect things that are going to be more impactful to your performance in the sport. So all of those, I understand, are reasons that the deadlift may not be the best exercise selection for specific athletes that need to perform in a sport. I agree. Now, on the other side of that, kind of to provide a little bit more context and kind of land where I feel about this, is that it lands on the coach to relay these things to the person that's lifting, right? If you have any sort of athlete that's going to perform at a reasonable level, say intermediate to advanced level, is that they should have the skills available to them to at least learn to do a deadlift properly, right? They should understand how to use their core. They should understand the differentiation between hinging at the hip, bending at the knee, and maintaining core stability as they do so. I think that's kind of a very basic skill that athletes need to possess to be successful in any sport. With that, it can be a very high return on investment movement in team training, right? Probably better than I do, but a lot of times in team training settings, it's very rushed. There's a lot of people trying to get into the weight room and out in a very short amount of time. And to do that effectively, you have to be very efficient with exercise selection. And that could be something kind of a big bang for your buck exercise where you're getting a lot of stimulus out of something that can be done relatively quickly if it's done well. And then the responsibility here starts to fall on the coach. In this case, the people telling you that you shouldn't be doing this exercise are the ones that should be teaching you how to do it safely, efficiently, and effectively. So that's a little bit of the friction that I get here, that I have towards this statement here, is that it lands on the coach to relay that message around how this person should be moving, how you should be programming, maybe appropriate RPEs to be working out, or percentage ranges, however they prescribe it, and rep schemes, so that you can do this exercise, you can do it safely, efficiently, and effectively, get the benefit from it, but you're not overexposing them to any sort of risk of injury, or you're not digging them a hole in terms of recovery that they can't get out of. And then whatever else you're doing around this in your workout needs to be supporting that, whether it's supporting recovering from that, or bolstering your ability to do that effectively, or turning that into something that looks more like the shape of your sport within the appropriate time range. So that's kind of my argument for both sides of that statement, landing on the side that I do think a deadlift is a very safe and effective exercise for athletes to do if it's implemented properly.
It's always the coach. Yeah, like I think you said it towards the end, like you said time period, which is like such a huge factor in organizing and prioritizing exercises for an athlete. I think at a higher level, defining what an athlete is, right? And I think that's a pretty washy definition, because everyone wants to train athletes. And like in Venezuela a few years ago, the leading cause of death was starvation. Do you know what the Venezuelan government did? They made it illegal. I swear this has to. They made it illegal to make the cause of death starvation.
Oh, all right. This person ate their arm, and that's how they died.
Yeah, right. But and I see this more and more. And like, I don't think people are around long enough to understand. Like, again, I reading social science research has probably been the most enlightening, and it's hard because this is the frontier that I'm on now, because I feel confident enough in my convictions to see both sides of the aisle with a lot of pressing questions, at least when it comes to low level shit like this. And frankly, in the corpus of training anyone, human beings, fucking turtles, whatever, like this is a pretty low level conversation. So I kind of lend to the social science research more, because that's really what like the word coach means. We could go into the etymology and definition if you want, but coaching is more multifaceted. And people, coaching wasn't a word 20 years ago, like 15, 20 years ago. Like if I said, like, what are you? If I said, oh, I'm a coach, you would inherently ask me like, oh, what sport, right? It was position or player coach, right? I was a fucking outside linebacker coach or whatever. Like, but we kind of just, we accepted, and I think in some part are a part of the shift, at least chronologically, whether or not we're causal or correlative, I don't really care. But, the accepted moniker was personal trainer. That was like what I wanted to be. I remember seeing the super jack guy getting out of a BMW M3, shout out Stu, and he got out with like a really attractive girl, and he was a personal trainer. And like, that was my mission in life, was like, well, I like cars and good looking women. I don't have, or they don't like me. That must be the answer, right? Becoming a personal trainer, like coach. And it's so, I was thinking about this the other day too. Like, do you remember watching, and this will run in about the same time scale as we're talking about, when the movie Old School came out? No, sorry, it was Wedding Crashers. Do you remember what fucking year was that? When did Wedding Crashers come out?
Probably like
2006,
maybe
2005,
yeah.
2005.
Ooh.
So 2000, not bad. That's pretty good. So 2005, Wedding Crashers comes out, and there's a scene in the movie that I thought about recently, and I don't know if I've seen it in 15 years. And there's a scene in the movie that I thought about. I was in the airport somewhere, and I was looking at books, and like the prevalence of, because I think these two things ran in succession with one another, and I don't think they're good or bad, but they just are. And I think noticing them and observing the thought is interesting. I noticed like so many, like something that I would just classify as like self-help books, right? There's like Time Magazine, Muscle and Fitness, and then there's like a bunch of self-help books. But I remember specifically in that movie where, you know, if you guys are familiar with the plot of the story, Vince Vaughn goes back to like his estranged friend that he used to crash weddings with, and then he kind of stopped because he like fell in love with this little redheaded chick, and the other guy got mad, and blah 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 blah. So on. So the end of the movie, it's like this triumphant full circle thing, and Vince Vaughn goes to Owen Wilson's house, and Owen Wilson's like clearly looks like he's not doing well, and he like walks in, the house is a mess, and there's, I don't know, there's like fried chicken everywhere, and he picks up this book, and he kind of like holds it up to him, and he says, "It's not mine." And at the end of their little exchange, and he goes, "I'm reading Don't Kill Yourself books." And then he's just like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "I thought you said the book wasn't yours." He's like, "It wasn't mine, but I glanced at it." And I'm like, that was what that was. Like, you know, every book that you saw on the shelf of, I don't know, a fucking, what are they called? Houston newsstands or whatever in an airport. They all would be classified under that category in 2005 as Don't Kill Yourself. And that was the time when people went to personal trainers. But now, you know, I think with the understanding, the marketability, the novelty of, you know, that side of things, right? The early adopters of fitness being older, me and you included, like the word coach kind of really subtly emerged as the prevailing moniker of what we do for a living, partially what me and you do for a living. And, you know, so I'm all to say I've led to social science research because that's the trend, you know, the reps and sets. There's a certain point of like understanding exercise setup, stabilization, selection, execution, where you're like, it is just, I would rather listen to porn stars talking to fat men than listen to someone argue the fucking Moxie score of oxygen saturation. It's like, look, man, at least the porn stars in the podcast aren't jerking off, right? At least they're just talking. You're jerking off. I don't get this fuck shit out of here. But it's like, and look, don't get me wrong. Like I understand, like I to a certain degree enjoy the deeper science of it, but my enjoyment really starts to peter off. See what I did? I used the word Peter because that's like a side word for dick. Yeah. Subtle things, you know. It's just enjoy that. Pick it up if I'm laying it down. But it starts like Peter, where I'm just like, this doesn't change the way I act, right? So that's my thing. It's like, well, if this research is great, but I'm still not going to change how I act with this insight in my brain, right? So it's like I like it, but I don't really care about it. So why am I talking about this? Well, I'm talking about this because, like, if you read social science research, somewhere between 70 to 93% of communication is nonverbal, which means like you're only left at the lowest end with 7% of what matters being verbal communication. So it's like people take two roads on this. They either go completely inept and disregard that 7%, misuse words, don't understand definitions, don't understand etymologies, just throw it around. Or if you can go like, look, this is the one thing that's like really in my conscious purview, like one thing that I can actually wield, where I'm not good at like hiding my emotions, right? If I think someone says something fucking retarded, dude, it's written all over my face and my shoulders.
Yeah, we have it on camera
and my
in certain
knees,
scenarios. It's amazing.
Oh my God, it's so bad. It's so bad, but I can maybe dig myself out of a hole with that 7%. I'm like, all right, like I know a few words, I know what they mean, I know how to use them. So it's like, if you're going to subscribe to the moniker of coach, which I think is almost this like the accepted term now, which I don't have a problem with. It's like you might want to pay attention to the language that you use, right? And you know, from the words, their definitions, their etymologies, out to like the sentences you form and the syntax, but really from like the thought that forms the entire idea. Like I think they don't understand, and I guess it's kind of meditative in a practice, but like you can observe. I forget who I was talking to about this the other day. It's like you can observe something and say nothing about it. Like you can have an opinion and shut the fuck up. It's a constant state of meditation for me, is like not posting things, but because I really need to think about what I think, and I need to be able to contextualize it. And in my brain, I need to do that under 60 seconds or less. So nothing goes out now for me that isn't one of those things or isn't a combination of those things. And I just don't think, like, look, adding this, this 6-inch glass veil in front of people. I'm holding a cell phone up for those of you not watching on YouTube.
The black mirror.
Right. Yeah. It makes it. Wow. Is that why they called it that?
Yeah.
Dude, look at you. Is it? You probably treat the writer or something. He probably a Netflix guy lives in the valleys waiting outside your office right now. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. But, I just think, my dog doesn't recognize me on FaceTime, but it recognizes my voice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, what? And then Tesla will show, she can't think in that level of abstraction, but it's like they're hearing your voice. Yeah, videos and reels and the yellow text are in vogue right now, but everyone's worried about production quality. And it's like, dude, figure out what you're going to say. But that starts with figure out what you think and why you think it, right? Because I think you can give context in a short period. And it's as we go through this exercise of okay, what do we talk about first? We talked about deadlifts and athleticism. It's and I challenge people to do this is we'll come up with a context first, right? Who are you talking to? And I think that's really big because that'll dictate the language and where it lands, right? Now you can come up with the avatar of who you're talking to as someone who's following you, or you can have it be someone who you want to follow you. Right? Those are the two different things.
Right.
We don't sell exercise programs, right? Our students are not our clients in the sense of we're not telling them how to exercise. They are people who purvey exercise to other people, right? So we're using a language that speaks to them, which is people are always asking you should dumb it down. It's no, we have thousands of prescript coaches literally the world over who can take a high level concept and distill it down to an actionable step for you. My job is to make that 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, right? That's my job. So I don't want to tell you how to do a bench press. Get the fuck out of here. But go talk to Nick Ridpath. Go talk to young Prince Saluji. Go talk to any one of the thousands of people who've got, and they can take that high level concept. They can think critically. They can apply it in a way that's actionable, and they can explain it in a way that you can understand. Right. And I think checking those boxes, if you want to be a coach, is because I remember coaches that were terrible at the hard skills of the game I played, primarily hockey, right? Practices were just insane. But fuck, we had a couple coaches, George, do you remember some of your wrestling coaches as a kid?
Oh yeah. Fuck yeah.
Do you remember some of their tactics?
I mean, I feel and this is probably true for you, but it was the age of just running kids into the ground. And if you asked a question, they would just make you do burpees or make you run or make you drill harder or whatever that was.
I remember being in Moortown, Ontario. And if anyone who I played hockey with this time was listening to that, shoot me a message. And we had this coach, George Winter. Now, hockey romanticizes the angry coach. That's because your coach is a player, right? Your coach, your coach bleeds with you on the ice. If your coach tunes up the ref verbally, that could be enough to get that could rally a team because he's kind of one of the boys at the same time. There's not and maybe that's true of other sports, but it's definitely true of the way we looked at coaches growing up. They'd all played hockey to a certain level. So if they got in the mix of it, it's man, look at, we had this one, our GM, Kevin Hood, or I forget the other guy, real handsome dude. I forget his name, but we had this head coach, George Winter. Winter fucking hated me. But he was actually one of the reasons I quit. But man, if Winter came in between, I remember this one time he came in between the second and third period. There's a stick rack where all I don't know, fucking 17 guys, 21 guys, whatever, put their sticks in this little thing in the middle of the room, sit down in your stall, and you kind of sit there. And Winter came in. Mind you, his blood pressure at this point, a realistic 300 over 850. like as red can be, and like, you know, not in good shape. I don't even know if he's still alive. There's a lot of people out there probably wishing he wasn't, but he's a good dude at heart. Just love the game so much. And Wince came in, and man, dude, you were pulling sticks out of the fucking rafters. He took that stick rack somehow, and as like a 60-year-old overweight man, like just knocking on death's door, and he took this stick rack with like 17 sticks, and he just fucking launched it. And it's like, by God, if that didn't fucking fire everyone up. So it's just like, I think people like understanding the importance, especially with the intersection of like the social media day and age, of that, you like, because social media posting can be a conversation, right? If you understand it to be that, like if done correct, if you understand, because Winter, it was not a dialogue with Winter. No one said, like literally no one said dick until the Zamboni got off the ice and we had to go back for the third period. Like no one said a fucking word, because there's nothing that beats, like that 93% of the nonverbal communication was not going to be offset by the 7% potential left on the board of our captain getting up and being like, let's fucking go, boys. Like, no one said anything. They took their sticks out of the fucking fluorescent light bulbs from the ceiling, and then they just went back on the ice, and then they turned up. So it's just like, you know, if these are the rules of the game, right? I think creating content in a conversational fashion, thinking contextually and purveying context, and I hope this is like a meta example of that, because you can't teach critical thinking, but you can display it. Right? We're showing our work of how we arrived at the conclusions that we've arrived at. And I think in doing so, people recognize the trends that are a part of that. And those trends are essentially what make critical thinking. Right? So like if someone thinks they're teaching you critical thinking, they're not. The only way you could potentially teach it is if you display it, exhibit it. People are aware enough to monitor it and then potentially emulate some of the characteristics of you showing your work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it actually reminds me of a post that Matt Penny put up today, is that you kind of have, I know, it's about the journey, man. It's okay to be bad at things. And you kind of have to be bad at things before you get good at things. So I think we're kind of in this atmosphere, especially with fitness on the internet. It can be this really contentious topic where people, they just feel paralyzed because they don't know what decision to make. Maybe if it's content creation, they are scared of putting something out there that may not be 100% right or may not be contextualized. But I think people need to understand that before you get good at this stuff, before you get good at showing your work and going through that process of critical thinking, or laying out that process of critical thinking, is that you have to be bad at it before you're going to get good at it. And, you know, you're probably one of the best people at that 7% that I know. And I mean, I listen to myself talk and I wonder how I put sentences together sometimes, but I'm better than I used to be. Like, what the fuck did I just say? I'm better than I used to be 6-7 years ago whenever we started this podcast, because we started off kind of bad at this shit and we just kind of figured it out as we went. And we've gotten better and we've talked to more people and we've talked about more things. And the big part about this is we've thought about more things, right? I think that's a really big part, is that critical thinking is the most important part of this. And those people that kind of put stuff out there and it's just very surface level, you start to poke at it and they get defensive. The reason that's not a conversation is because there's not that deeper level of thought behind it. Is that they just put something out there and it is what it is and they don't really know why. But there's a lot of things that I still sit and maybe I see it on the internet. Maybe it's something that someone asks me in the gym or on the internet or in the DM, whatever it might be, is that, and I have to say, I don't know, but it doesn't end there. It's still a conversation, but I take the time and I really think through it. And the deeper your understanding about whatever it might be, whether it's fitness in general, there's a lot of facets to that. Is that it could be biomechanics, it could be energy systems, it could be program layout, it could be nutrition, whatever that is there's these underlying principles that are going to be able to guide you in the right direction. So if you go and you either learn these or you seek these out, then you can start to use these things to guide your opinion or start to form an opinion on whatever this might be. And then you could turn it into a conversation. But if you don't have that underlying knowledge, or if you don't seek out that underlying knowledge or context, then it just becomes defensive, or these kind of one-sided statements that become a little bit more contentious because people are more so they're focused on defending what they said as opposed to understanding any more context behind it or learning. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm happy to admit that I'm wrong. I mean, maybe I'm not happy to admit that I'm wrong, but I'm willing to admit that I'm wrong, and I'm willing to learn why I was wrong so that I don't make that same mistake again. And that's going to be the difference between someone that's bad at something, but that's a step in the process of them getting better at something, versus someone that's bad at something and they just stay bad at something.
Yeah, I would say that thought comes from doing things. And it's like, I think, and that's why I love trading with guys that aren't into the academic stuff. Like I'm lucky, I think, that I can still have access to, and I'm sure like everyone can have access to anyone, but like I'm lucky that I can like call up a friend of mine who's going to go to Mr. Olympia and train with him and listen to him and just like not like zero judgment and just be like, because here's the thing, and this is a soundbite. Marshall, clip it. I think for the last 15 years, I'm going to say this again because someone just hit like a power snatch and dropped it. For the last 15 years, I think, yeah, you're right. For the last 15 years, I think people have been leaning on research to prove why people are wrong rather than looking at principles to figure out why they might be right. Clip. Cool. All right. You can unmute it if you want. Thanks, Doug. But like, I would challenge people to lean into an instinct that might not be validated, easily valid. See, this is the 2% where I don't know if that's even a word or not. But that can't be verified. I think something that you feel. I think I would challenge people to make a piece of content this week if that's what you're after, and based off your experience, the things that you do, like what's that quote? All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking, which like isn't really a great quote, but that's like a Nietzsche quote, right? And I think metaphysically it doesn't have to be walking, right? It's not about necessarily the act of getting 10,000 steps, but it's the act of like doing something. It's the act of doing the act, right? I think that's, if I had to imagine what that quote means, I don't think Nietzsche was sitting there with like a Whoop band on at like 9 o'clock, pacing his living room, trying to get to 10,000 steps, right? But it's like doing things and experiencing things. So I think like if you've been in this industry and you find yourself gravitating to something that you like, I think a good place to start is putting out things, not to be contentious, but things that you think work. Right? Like we talked about stability, and it's weird to see the evolution of like stability in the public discourse, right? Because I've had people apologize to me on podcasts about their initial thought process against my interpretation of stability, and now all of a sudden like they've changed their entire. And it's not my goal. I don't really care. I'm like, I'm just telling you what I do. But the thing is, I became harder to argue with the more I did stuff, right? Like I've done a lot of stuff, and it's just like, hold on, he's doing this and seemingly better. And it's like, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it reminded me of this story. Well, they use it in a different context, but I think this can help maybe contextualize someone's fear around putting something out, because it's different, man. Like when we put out stuff on Instagram, like, I don't know, shit posting and bots and hate online, I don't think it was as pervasive. And obviously, and like there was less interconnectivity of it all. So like, I don't want to be, ignorant to the plight of the times. But, I remember putting stuff out and like, I wasn't sure why mechanistically something worked. I just found out that it worked. And my thoughts have like changed or evolved. But like, I think of this one dude, Barry James Marshall. Do you know who that is? Have you ever heard the story of Barry James Marshall? So he had this hunch that ulcers. So I heard this on a podcast. I think it was like a Lex Friedman podcast, and they told the story about it in a different context. But like, so Barry James Marshall had this hunch that H. pylori was the cause of stomach ulcers, and everyone in like the accepted narrative at the time, although I don't necessarily like the word narrative. So the accepted thought process of what caused stomach ulcers at the time was stress. They're like, stress causes stomach ulcers. And he's like, I think it's H. pylori. And they're like, "No, it's stress." And you know what he did? And think about this next time you go to post a piece of content that just toes the company line or is just contrarian for no reason. He drank a bottle of H. pylori and got a fucking stomach ulcer. I was just like,
lives it.
Right? Yeah, he Nietzsche'd that shit. He walked 1,000 miles in the steps of someone with a stomach ulcer. He's like, "Do you believe me now?" Like, that's like, but like he didn't know for sure, but like he trusted his instinct. He understood his that he was recognizing patterns and things, and that forever changed the course of medicine, right? Like, and all it took was one dude, get rid of him, and we're still thinking ulcers might be caused by stress. Not, I mean, who's to say? I'm not a fucking expert at this. Sure, maybe it has something to do with it, but like, he was like, okay, like I'm willing to put my line in the sand here based off of my experience. And this is, and that's like, think of that when you go to hit, or when you have trepidation of like posting something that you do that might be unverifiable. Verifiable sounds better than validatable. And I'm saying it.
Yeah.
Sounds better.
Yeah.
But it's like, think of it. Is this a bottle? Is this publish button or post, whatever the fuck it was on Instagram? Is this button a bottle of H. pylori, and will I get a stomach ulcer? If the answer is no, then there's no consequence.
Yeah. There literally is no consequence. And I think that's a really good point too, because people just accept things, right? Is especially people that aren't an expert in the field. If you tell them something, or like, I don't know if this is still a thing, but do you remember Dr. Oz? That like doctor
Dude,
that
Mehmet.
went on like
Turkish delight, man. Mehmet, he ran for like governor of New York, New Jersey. He legit ran for like, he's the spokesperson for Turkish Airlines. And also, Mehmet is one of 4 Turkish names that exist. Not actually, but a lot of people in Oz are in Turkey named Mehmet. So yes, I do.
That's wild. So that's it. Good for him. He's doing all right. And he has been doing all right because he's been giving medical advice to the average stay-at-home mom for the last 30 years now or something. Like, isn't that wild that people that if it's a trusted source and they're exposed to information, they're just going to accept it. That's the way it is for most people most of the time. So every now and then.
Oz,
yeah,
Rogan, Huberman.
That's it.
No shade on Huberman, but that's like the relationship.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And so there's these people that maybe have built trust with a large amount of people because of the internet and podcast and television and all that. So that's great. Information can travel very quickly to a lot of people, and people have access to all this information that maybe they just accept now. They don't go through that critical thinking process to say, okay, this is the information that I was presented with. Let's dissect this and let's see how I can use it or how I can interpret this to be productive. That takes some work. It takes time. It takes a lot of understanding to be able to do that. And people just don't. So they just accept that information. And I think this is probably true for you. It's definitely true for me. There's times where you'll start to see through the bullshit. And you'll see like, everyone's saying this, but it doesn't make sense to me. And this is why it doesn't make sense to me. And you could come up with a valid, logical reason why that thing may not be right, or why the thing that you're thinking may be correct or more correct than the information you're presented with. And those are those moments where it's like, it may not be the thing. What you're thinking may be the H. pylori, and what everyone's saying is stress. And you might be the one that's right, and everyone else might just be bullshit. And that's like kind of one of the guiding principles that I live my life by right now, is that everyone's bullshit and no one knows what they're doing, because it's kind of fucking true. I mean, there's
the likelihood, randomness is so prevalent in this conversation, right? Like, you have no idea outside this current moment what's going to happen next, because you couldn't. Like, if you were to be aware of it, you just kill yourself, because like giant meteor, nuclear annihilation, right? Tanks rolling down, like fucking turning 25th Miami Ave into Tiananmen Square. Like, all of these things exist in the possible, but I exist right now, and none of those things are happening. So I think, the randomness of it. Like, we thought about this with our courses earlier. We have like back of the napkin names for the courses we put out in development, like pre-concept, but pre-draft. And we just like give them a designation. Like the breathing course is a great example. Now, we are not marketers or geniuses in e-commerce sales. So like we don't even think, because by the time it's like dude, hand to God, my parents back in Windsor, there's this British couple that moved in behind them, and they have a cat and a dog that are named Cat and Dog.
Nice. Sick.
That's kind of what our courses are like, because it's like it just starts out of this thing, and we're just like, I don't know, it's the whatever the breathing course is. Shout out Schultz. It's like, and then all of a sudden we're making like logos and design concepts and marketing material, and it's a year and a half later. We're like, hey, should we spice that up a little bit? Like, should we give it a name other than like the ridiculous? Because it's just. But people, it's like kind of accepted and people know what it is. And it's like kind of, but like that's ideas that inspire action in the industry. It's like, I don't know, someone said low carb once and 80 lemmings just went, okay. And then they all went somewhere else and 160 or 320 or 640 lemmings, just like exponential growth until the whole world thinks a certain way. Right. And it's like, I think, the one thing you need to realize with information is that mechanisms become important at scale, because that if you can explain a mechanism or a principle, that's what matters at scale. So I had this conversation with someone like this morning, actually, and I love thinking about this. Like, if you think about religion, like where religion came from, and I know this is like super abstract, but this is like critical thinking shit. Like this is how I arrive at the crazy analogies that I arrive at, is like, how many different ways can I look at this underlying principle and see it play out in different arenas? Religion made a lot of sense when there was like 30,000 people around, right? Like I'm pulling that number kind of out of my ass, but I'm trying to create a relative scale to the population of the earth now to the population of the earth, like, I don't know, a couple thousand years ago. And it's like, if you've ever been to a dictatorship country or a communist country, communism like actually works really well at scale. Like my household as a kid, flags of Louise Shallow in the house. She ruled with an iron fist, right? She was the dictator, and it worked at scale, right? But as it scales, it stops working or becomes less effective, right? So it's like, as the world tipped over, like I think religion at scale is a very useful way of organizing morality, but at a certain scale, it's not, right? At a certain scale, it's like we run into the crazy shit. We're like, oh, like I've looked. There's literally, and we've talked about this before. There's a mural on an auto shop outside my window, and I don't want to give her any press on the show, but it's of a woman. There's 3 people on the mural, and it literally has an OnlyFans hashtag thing. Like, it's well done. It's very
maybe we should invite her on the podcast.
Invite her on the podcast. See, now we're thinking with our head. But it's just like, maybe now would be a good time for a god, right? Like there has to be something that fits that at scale. So it's like, I think when you understand the scale of social media, I think it can alter your approach, because I really think principles are what you're trying to get across. I think that's the most effective tool of communication. So having like a principles-based approach of like, not does something work, does it not work? Try and explain how something works, right? Or when something works. I think that'll get you to because you said something interesting that I'm a firm believer of, and it's the antidote to a bad idea is a better idea. So it's not like contrarian thoughts are not useful unless they inspire inspire a better idea, right? Like, because the better idea isn't the opposite. Right. Like the amount of dimensions that exist, like everyone, like I think duality is a problem, and we could get Lou on and we could all take a bunch of drugs and we could talk about this at like a super deep level. But I think great. Let's go. But like, I think duality is a problem because it creates a spectrum between mind and body, right? Like, I think, therefore I am. It's like, dude, there's so much shit going on that we have no idea, right? There's so many things. Like, the aliens are in the room right now. We just don't have the receptors to see them or communicate with them, right? Like, you see this with animals. Like, I don't know, my dog pops off at shit that's not there. It's there. Yeah. It's just, we are just on a different way. Go look at electromagnetic spectrum, right? And I'm not going to turn this into a drug podcast. But maybe we should just turn this into a drug and pornography podcast. But if we think of like, it's almost guaranteed that the opposite of what you think is wrong is not right. It's a statistical probability that the opposite doesn't have. Like I think of like I don't know, like think of a circle, or like, and in a more abstract sense with an extra dimension, think of a sphere, and it's like you draw a line from the center out to the edge of a sphere, and then draw it to the other side, and then just cover the outside with random shit, and just see where those 2 points point at. It's like the correct answer could be like 3 degrees closer to that, not the exact inverse on the other side of the sphere. If that thought process makes sense, it's probably easier to think of it as a circle dimensionally, but like it's almost a guarantee. And like look at things that have been like stress. Like let's play this out with the Marshall situation with H. pylori. So a bunch of people think stress. You know what the opposite Instagram post would be? Happiness. Happiness causes, or no stress. It's like, it's definitely not the opposite of that, right? Because like H. pylori as a cause is like a complete inflection point in the opposite directions across, multiple axes. And then you end up with a guy just like drinking fucking H. pylori and being like, hey, you see, it wasn't on this line of thought at all. It was a complete other dimension. So it's like, if you think about things in statistical probabilities, and you're posting things on Instagram that aren't just like stuff that you've experienced, stuff that you've done, things that you've thought as you've walked in a metaphorical sense, to stick with the quote, the likelihood is if you think they're wrong and your right answer is the opposite, guess what?
Yeah.
You go drink H. pylori. Like that's your solution. It's like you're probably closer or as likely to be right by drinking H. pylori than you are to whatever your contrarian, zero thought process, no critical thinking answer is, which is like hard to grasp. That idea is so hard to grasp.
Yeah, I love that too, because that's a really vivid description of it, and how you could be just completely in the wrong fucking ballpark, and especially as we take this down, as we zoom out to that extent, is like, okay, the difference between happiness and some fucking gut bacteria. And we look at exercise and we talk about, move your elbow 3 degrees anterior to your body because scaption, versus, you know how little that fucking matters? Like, you know how many people are huge that have done dumb shit for years? And there's people that are making these contrary opinions to these very finite things that matter to so little people to such a little degree. And I'm not going to say that this stuff doesn't matter, because this is exactly what our entire company's based off of, is making better decisions around this stuff. But at the same time, when it comes to, knife fights on the internet, is that, does this stuff really matter that much? Or are you just trying to get a rise out of someone and get someone to comment and whatever? Because that's, I hate that it always comes back to social media, but it always comes back to social media because that's kind of where we live now. Is that,
well, social media is a mirror, right? Because it's human behavior just on display in a pitch and frequency and a tone that we're not meant to see it at.
Yeah. And I heard this term thrown out there the other day about behavior on social media and how it's like so widely distributed that it's just copy paste was the term. Is that everyone is just like a copy paste right now, meaning that they have the same viewpoints, they have the same interests, they all watch the same Netflix special, they have the same hobbies. Like, I don't know, every girl just wants a hug and tacos or something, and like some stupid quote like that. But all the behavior is so copy paste, and I think that's kind of what we're referring to with all of this. Is that that's kind of, online coach, fitness bro persona, copy paste. I'm gonna be contentious about this post about X, Y, and Z just because I think something different, and that's the behavior that kind of gets, I'm hesitant to say rewarded, but perpetuated in this space.
Created.
Because, I know.
That's what gets created.
Yeah, it's manufactured, exactly, by these algorithms. Yeah. That's what it is that, more people are going to see your post if more people say things about your post and share it with their friends. So you're going to say something that gets people talking. Not necessarily something that's productive or adds value. It's just going to be something that appeases the algorithm and keeps you on that app longer. So you're, really falling into the trap of Meta consuming your attention so they could sell you things and make money off of you in your business model to be an online coach, which is a really weird outlook to have on this, but that's kind of what it ends up being.
But I think and that's the crazy part. Like it's a precondition to the accessibility of massive amounts of information that even at a computer's level, because like we think like that abstract thought we just did of like H. pylori drawing a straight line through a sphere or even a circle and coming out the other side and being like stressed. It's like, well, that's a squiggly fucking line, man. So it's like,
right.
But our brain draws that like we're like algorithms, and as you look at like artificial intelligence, you're running into the same problems, right? Like it's easy categorization is what allows us to synthesize massive amounts of data. Like there are things that you just don't notice because it would kill you, like pain. Like, well, I'm sure you and I have been in situations where someone asks you like, oh my God, are you okay? And you don't feel shit. Because if you did, you die. You 100% die. Right? Like that's what going into shock is. It's your body's just literally going like, yo, we're going to put you under for a minute because if you felt this, it's crazy. You'd die. Yeah. So it's like, but the manufacturing of that system of categorization as like, I don't know, either a necessity or a tool, whether it's malicious or whether it's just a precondition to massive amounts of data, like categorizing conversations like that seems to be, again, like I said, whether it's a necessity or a precondition to that amount of data, it's the truth, right? That's what's happening, right? You are getting categorized on either side of the aisle by no other reason that that's how the people who design algorithms are designed to interpret things, period, right? It's an extent until we have true sentient AI. Like I think that will always be the precondition because it's created by people who are suffering from that precondition, right? Like, dualism kind of runs the entire world. Hot is cold, up is down, left is right. And it's like, well, not really. Like symmetry, like in the universe is not really a thing. But fuck, if we had to deal with that level of information every day, we would be, in a bunker like 95 feet underground, right? If we had access to and could weigh in the probabilities and likelihoods of things happening. So we just go like, based off of the fact that the way things have been this way for a long time, it'll be that way tomorrow. It's like not at all, and increasingly less so, which leaves that probability of that being true infinitesimally small, right? Which is like, if you thought about that, you die. You'd literally die from an overload of information, right? So it's just like, and all of this comes back to content creation, which is so funny. But I really think social media is a mirror of the problem of thinking and communicating at scale. And it's like, if you can contextualize it down to a conversation, right? I think religion is massively useful at the scale of like 5 or 6 people, right? Or at the scale of 30 people who don't know, like, I don't know. I'm sure Mennonites get up to crazy shit. They're all people, but it's like, that maybe that's a really bad example, but it's like, if you look at it and if you share with what you think to be a small community and you don't fall victim to the trap that's really no fault of anyone's own, because it is, I think, just a precondition to categorizing large amounts of information. It's a scaling problem. Like, I think not only will you have a way better outlook on social media in your life, but you'll also be contributing to the story long term, right? Like when Barry Marshall drank H. pylori, there certainly had to have been part of them. Either he was like, he's probably unbelievably certain, like otherwise you're not going to go down that road. But there may have been a molecule in his brain that was like, but what if you're wrong? But thank God there was enough molecules in his brain that were like, hey, you're probably right. Right. So it's like you can add to the story. And I think that's like the fun of it is like, all right, cool. You'll create a side conversation and draw a line that's not just linear in the opposite direction, but maybe send people off on a different course. Like we have no fucking idea what's going on with the human body. Not a clue.
Yeah.
Not 0%, 1.001. We have no idea. And the only way we knew what we know now is like, I don't know, think of Poliquin. Poliquin was using cluster training 25 years before the research on cluster training came out. And he was just like, I don't know, it fucking works. You figure it out. I'm too busy winning gold medals for Olympians. Right. And it's like you can sit there and be like, Poliquin this, Poliquin that. It's like homeboy walked, man. Like RIP. Like he was out there doing his, and that's why he'll be remembered, right? He's like the Barry Marshall of fucking strength and conditioning. He was a guy that was willing to drink the H. pylori and see what happened, and because he had a hunch. And it's just like, do that. Like if you strive for that, I think everything becomes much more positive across the board.
Yeah. I think my big takeaway from this conversation is more so not to be a contrarian, but to be curious, right? Because the difference there is someone that's just looking to oppose a point of view, just to oppose it, right? Is you think this, so I think that. Fuck you. Which, like, sometimes, yeah, we all get to that place. But a more productive mindset is to be curious, because curiosity, it's going to bring you answers. Right? Is that if I think that, you say something that I don't agree with and I'm curious about it, and maybe it stems a conversation between you and I, or maybe that stems me going to find out more information on this thing that I don't know about, or that I disagree with that you said. And then I learn about that thing and I can form a very sound opinion on that. I think curiosity should be the root of, to bring it back to today, maybe content creation, but also understanding more about the things that we're portraying in, whatever medium that is. So if you approach this stuff with curiosity, as opposed to just trying to be contrary to whatever's going on in that space, then I think you'll have more answers and you'll become better for it. Is you're going to have more knowledge in your repertoire. You're going to go through that critical thinking process, and you're going to form better opinions about these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally like the oldest story ever told, like curiosity and creation. Like, hey, do you think we should eat that? Nah, the old guy said don't eat it. Snake comes around. I think you should eat it. I don't know. This snake's making a lot of good points. It's like, it's a fucking snake. Like, clearly, it was the cure. I mean, that's like the kind of the creation story, right? Like that's the Adam and Eve, and like, but it's so interesting. Fuck. I mean, I'm not going to turn this into a biblical podcast on top of all the other crazy abstract shit, but it's like when you look at the history of things, like not word, like why word or what words mean, but like what they have meant, like how they're used in context. Like this idea of context is all about, or we've kind of painted this whole conversation with context, but it's like, look how other people, like one of the easiest ways for me to learn a word is to see it used in a sentence. Okay, I get it now. Yeah. But like if I hear a word in, I don't know, if I'm just like listening to something, I hear or read a word that I haven't seen before, which, it happens. I think that should almost be the goal if you're like trying to stay on the leading edge of things, is like vocabulary is a really interesting way to do it. And I don't really understand because sometimes definitions of big words are just riddled with other big words you've never heard of. You're like, oh, fuck, like I don't have time for this. Like, just tell me what it means. I go, oh, I see it in a sentence. Like, okay. Right. So it's like, where in the history of time have we seen a relationship between curiosity and creativity? It's like, oh, like curiosity is the precondition to creation.
Yeah.
Right. And if you accept it as a precondition, it's like you don't get creation without curiosity. Right. And I think that's true of so many relationships. Like some things like, oh man, if only this was easy. It's like, sorry, dude. If you accept that as a precondition, like that the thing you want is hard and it's a precondition to getting the thing you want, you just go, okay, it's not that life is unfair. That is a precondition to life. So you want to live, then you accept these preconditions and you go, okay. And so every time you're fucking posed with one of these issues, you just go, yeah, that's the rules, right? It's not just like I'm getting battered down for whatever reason. It's like that's the precondition. So it's not that like there's a relationship or there is a relationship between curiosity and creativity, but the relationship is that of a precondition. Creation is curiosity, is a precondition to creativity or creation.
That one. Nailed it.
Got that. Nailed it. Words. So we've talked about one thing, and it's an hour and 4 minutes into the podcast. So I dare go down the rabbit hole of trying to dissect more than just our deadlift's good for athleticism, because we've talked everything about like the universe to H. pylori to God, the creation. But it's like, but I think one of the things I think we set out to achieve 7 seconds before I hit record. Well, 2 seconds before I hit record and the 5-second countdown that led us into this was like showing your work. How did we arrive at this process? And it's like, yeah, some people might point at, autism spectrum disorders or Asperger's as the culprit, and some people might be right. But it's like, there's so much that goes into like just paying attention, thinking about like observing your thoughts. Why do you think that? Do you believe that? Do you think that? And are you curious, and do you have the precondition for creative thought to begin with? Because I think put something out there that you're unsure of, and then you'll realize that like certainty is a bit of a farce anyways, right? So it's like, but I think that'll lead the conversation and it'll improve it. Maybe by the time we die, we might know like 0.002% of what there is to know about this stuff. But if we keep doing this crossfire, CNN, red versus blue, elephants versus donkeys, right? Dolphins versus I don't know, the Buccaneers or whatever, like it's just going to be like, it's going to be so predictable. But I'd like to see it because it's something that I've become more mindful. Like I was as guilty as that as any. But then you did some stuff and you learned some stuff and you said some stuff and then you expanded. And like this is the cornerstone. This podcast has been, there's no way we'd be able to do what we do without this. Start a podcast. Fuck it. Yeah. Right? No one will listen. That's the best part. Oh, dog. Some of our best conversations, I think, are earlier episodes. Because we knew verifiably that no one was listening. If you want to go back and learn some shit, go back and listen to our first 20 podcasts at RX Radio. Dimes. Fucking dimes.
Amazing. So
yeah, from the technical aspect, I think that's where we cultivated a lot of our audience of like critical thinkers, because it's like we had no expectations that anyone was listening to even criticize us to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just having conversations about things that we wanted to have conversations about and we thought might be helpful for other people if they ever did listen. But yeah, I think my take on a lot of this stuff is next time you're going to be a dick on the internet, just don't. And try and poke holes in your own beliefs and your own thoughts before you try and do it to someone else's. And that's how you grow. That's how you find growth is you become more sure of the things that you think of because you know where the holes are. And you can change your beliefs around that once you find them. So be curious and criticize yourself before you criticize others.
Call your mother. And as my tattoo artist always says, life's not that hard. Call your mother and don't fuck kids. Which is like, I mean, is he a saint or a god? I think so. All right. That's so we're not going to sell you any shit. Hey, preach. All right. We'll wrap. Appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll see you next episode.
Thanks, guys.